If you haven't seen the Vietnam War Part 1, feel free to watch it here. In that, I covered the history of the war from the early days of French colonization until the end of 1967. The watershed moment came with the Tet Offensive of 1968. During the Tet lunar holiday in January, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese launched a massive coordinated attack on more than 100 cities across South Vietnam, shattering illusions that American involvement in the war was coming to an end, as had been suggested by General Westmoreland months earlier. Militarily, Tet had been a significant victory for American-led forces, but it was a public relations disaster. How could a side so well armed and manned be caught off guard by such a well-coordinated communist assault? How could this be called progress in the war? These questions consumed the American public, and as his approval rating tanked, President Johnson announced he would not seek his second term as president in the 1968 election. It was here that the Americanization policy was taken to have failed, and it would be replaced by a policy of Vietnamization. Richard Nixon became president in 1969 and appealed to a silent majority of Americans who he thought supported his idea of gradually ending the war rather than immediately. Nevertheless, two serious incidents occurred which further dented the public view of the conflict. The first was news of the My Lai massacre in March 1968, but which became public knowledge in November 1969. In this massacre, American soldiers had killed around 400 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, shocking the world. Secondly, in 1970, Nixon ordered the bombing of neighbouring Cambodia, with the intent to destroy communist supply lines. This was seen as expanding the war in the face of Nixon's purported attempts to withdraw American troops, and in the resulting furore on the nation's university campuses, 4 students were shot by National Guardsmen at Kent State University in Ohio. 11 days later, 2 students were shot dead at Jackson State College in Mississippi. Despite these highly controversial incidents, Vietnamization did, however, mean the end of the war for the United States. Nixon gradually withdrew American soldiers while continuing peace negotiations with the North and the Viet Cong. By 1971, the number of US troops had been reduced to a little less than 200,000, and Australia and New Zealand withdrew their forces the same year. The anti-war movement spread rapidly, partly in the face of disclosures about attempts by the government to deceive the public about Vietnam in the Pentagon Papers, and Nixon moved to haggle through a peace settlement in the face of strong public demand. He was re-elected in 1972. After much political deadlock and fighting, including the bombing of North Vietnam in 1972, in January 1973 the Paris Peace Accords were signed, largely ending American involvement. The last combat troops left in March 1973, only advisors remained. The war, however, did not end, and there were never any serious attempts by both sides to strictly adhere to the terms of the Paris Agreement. After fierce clashes in January 1974, South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thieu declared that the war had restarted. The Viet Cong had already recaptured much of their lost territory in the north, with the absence of direct American involvement prepared for a much larger offensive. Nixon resigned in August 1974 after the Watergate scandal and was succeeded by Gerald Ford. 4 months later, the North began their final offensive and pushed deeper and deeper into South Vietnam. Ford was prohibited from intervening without congressional approval by the Case-Church Amendment of 1973. Without help, South Vietnam was largely powerless in the face of the well-organized and Soviet-equipped communist advance. The US Congress had already cut funding to South Vietnam, and despite the pleas of President Ford, Congress further decreased materiel and money to Saigon. On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese troops captured Saigon and South Vietnam surrendered, ending the Vietnam War. 58,000 American troops were dead. 200,000 South Vietnamese troops perished. 1.1 million North Vietnamese troops were killed. Staggeringly, over 2 million Vietnamese civilians had perished in the catastrophic struggle over Vietnam's future. Act 3. Postscript. Vietnam was formally united under communist rule in 1976, Saigon was renamed to Ho Chi Minh City, and more than 3 million people fled the country over the next quarter century. In South Vietnam, hundreds of thousands of civilians and members of the military and civil service were sent to re-education camps as the new communist authorities asserted their rule. The use of chemical defoliants by the United States in the war, most famously Agent Orange, though there was also Agents Blue, Green, Purple, Pink and White, caused birth defects, disease and other health problems among many Vietnamese. To this day, it continues to negatively affect the natural environment in Vietnam. The domino theory was proven true to a degree. Laos and Cambodia did eventually fall to communism, the latter enduring one of the worst genocides in history, but this did not fundamentally alter the United States' position as a superpower or greatly increase the ability of the Soviets to project communist influence. Apart from the thousands of war dead, the effect on America was largely psychological. The inability of American forces to prevail in the strategic aspect of the war, especially in winning hearts and minds in Vietnam, despite victory in conventional battles against their enemy, led to a rethink in military strategy. The massive anti-war movement, intertwined combined with the counterculture and civil rights, sharply polarized generations of Americans and left many wary of further interventions and wars. The conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan are sometimes compared to the Vietnam quagmire. Many of those who had overseen the war, such as Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, later admitted intervention had been a mistake. In all, Vietnam is largely seen as a disastrous failure of foreign policy and military strategy. And the cost of the war is ongoing. More than $20 billion is paid to families and survivors of the war each year in claims related to Vietnam. After Vietnam fought bitter wars with Cambodia and China in the 2 decades after the conflict, it initiated economic reforms named Doi Moi, which led to the growth of private enterprise and a rapid increase in foreign investment. Almost 7 million people visited Vietnam in 2012 and 10 million in 2016, ensuring its place as a top tourist destination in Asia. The political system, however, saw less change. The country is still governed by an authoritarian communist dictatorship. Vietnam today enjoys cordial relations with the United States. In 2000, President Bill Clinton made the first visit to the country by an American president since the end of the conflict. While both nations have moved beyond the tense and bloody years of the war, it remains both a fascinating and dark chapter of the past. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this video or you found it informative, please do subscribe, share and comment, and remember to press that little notification bell. Every little bit helps. More videos are certainly on their way. In the meantime, you can check out these other kinetic history videos here, including the Vietnam War Part 1. Thank you and see you next time.